There's Rod.
Hi, Rod. Welcome. You're on mute, but welcome.
Rod, I've made you an attendee, mate. So mics and cameras are off for the time being, but we will open them up at the end if there's questions and stuff.
I'm not going to start for those just joined. I'm still trying to work out how I see those just joined because I think I've got my Teams thing in the wrong place. I'm not going to start at 12:30. I'll start, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes time. So no later than 12:35. If anybody still wants to powder their nose or get a coffee, they're welcome to for 2 or 3 minutes.
Jeremy is just right. I don't know who Jeremy is, but I'm going to add him in. Admitting Jeremy. Jeremy, welcome. Your mic and your camera will be disabled for the initial bit, but we'll open the mics up at the end so we can, if we need to have a conversation, we can. Mark is going to be leading this, and we're going to be starting in a few minutes. Just going to give just for any late stragglers to get signed in. We won't steal all your lunchtime either, I suspect. It won't be the full hour.
I can only see me see you at the moment. I take it people can see me. You can see me, can you, Gareth?
Yeah, they can see you, mate. They'll be able to see
drink,
you.
Are they? Okay.
Don't worry.
One of these days, I really must, I've only been using it for whatever it is, half a dozen years. I really must learn how to use Teams.
You ought to come on one of my training courses, mate.
I should, yes. I should come on one of your training courses. That would be
I do actually teach. There's a Microsoft course called, I can't remember the number of it, but I am qualified to teach it, and it's all about Teams administration. Doesn't mean I know anything, it just means I passed the exam. Hiya, Pablo.
Also betting that Laithwaites are going to deliver my box of wine right in the middle of this webinar.
That'd be you have to get somebody else to answer the door, mate, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm sure the dog would be delighted to do that, but I don't think his retractable thumb or whatever it is that they have is quite up to opening the latch yet.
Okay.
Right, we're at 12:33. Shall we start at 12:34? Do you think? Whenever that clicks on to 12:34, which we might find a minute is a very long time, or we might find that it goes to 12:34 in approximately no seconds at all.
I think you're probably going to be finding a minute's a very long time here.
You think I'm going to find a minute's a very long time? Okay. Rightio then. What's up, mate?
No, it's okay. Go for it, mate. I was going to make a joke. I'll leave it there.
Make a joke if you want. We might get to 12:34. Oh, there we go. Sue, there we go. I knew just hanging on, just that final minute, we would have one more. We would have Sue Brackett's guest coming in. Welcome, Sue Brackett's guest.
Stu, we're turning off mics and cameras for the initial bit. We'll open up the mics at the end for questions and stuff. But I'm going to give you over to Mark now, and I'll.
So you'll pipe up. Will you pipe up when you decide to pipe up?
I'll pipe up when I'm allowed to. Yeah, indeed.
Well, you're going to say something fairly shortly. But anyway, right. So, hi everybody. I'm Mark Williams. Welcome to this talk, this chat. Lessons. What have we called it? Lessons learned from writing our book. I know he already has, but say hi, Geth.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gethy, and I co-authored this book with Mark. Oh, the latest book that I published with Mark, and that's why I am here.
Jolly good. So, this is sort of just about how hopefully this is going to flow and any kind of interaction that we do or don't get from your good selves on the chat. So I'm going to tell you about what we're going to cover. I think it's on the next slide, or maybe a slide after that. So for the avoidance of doubt, we are recording this. It will be made available to you after. We usually try and get the recording out on email within 2 or 3 days of. I won't make any promises on guest's behalf because he does that hard work, but something like 2 or 3 days after the end of the event. So maybe tomorrow, maybe early next week. But you should, if you're interested in having a look again or whatever, then you should be able to get it shortly. And as everybody knows, we've got cameras off on you, so I haven't got a clue who I'm talking to, and voices off for now. And if we want to chat a bit later, we can. If you've got questions or comments that you know about already, questions, for example, that you might want to get answered a bit later on, or things that occur to you during this chat, then pop them in the chat. We will, Gethin's going to monitor the chat because I'm crap at that. And we'll see it and he'll nudge me about it, or he'll reply himself, or we'll have a reply at the end.
Pop your questions in the chat. If most likely we might just deal with them at the end in a Q&A. Yeah. But if they're relevant, I can come back. But it'd probably give us something else to talk about.
If you're not connected with us and you want to, you can find us on LinkedIn. There are some details on the next slide. Of course, those details will be in the recording afterwards as well. If something comes to you after the session, drop us an email. Again, details are on the next slide. So, why are you here? Maybe you want to write a book, or you're thinking about publishing something. Maybe you want to pass on some knowledge, or you just want to offer some people some help or some advice. Maybe you're just curious about this stuff. Maybe you want to know whether it's worth it. Spoiler alert, it depends. Maybe you want to know how much time it takes, or what you should know before or during or after publishing. Maybe even what you can do with whatever you've written next. So in summary, we will have a go at all of that. But first, just make sure that everybody knows what they're here for. Whilst we are going to reference our book throughout this session on 2 or 3 slides, this webinar is about writing a book. It's not about the topic of data. So just for clarity on that. Right. So slide 2 isn't going. Why is slide 2 not going? Oh, maybe because I'm not in the right. There we go. Mouse control is clearly a problem. Yes, do you want to say a little bit about yourself while I gather my thoughts?
Yes, I can do, mate. So for those of you that don't know me, and I know a couple of you on the call do, and perhaps a couple of you don't, my name's Gethin. I've been working in the data space and in the Microsoft technology data space for about 20 years or so. I've had a lot of different jobs in that time, from report writer to web developer, DBA. And for the last 16 or so years, just ticked over, going into my 17th year, I've been running my consultancy and training business, gethinellis.com. And over the last couple of years, Mark and I have partnered up. We've got a bit of a joint venture going, and we're working together to deliver some things in the data space. Just other useful bit to know about me. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. I have written, this is my 3rd book I've been involved in. 2 were published about 10 years ago. One was on SQL Server 2014 database administration, and the second was on infrastructure as a service in Azure. And they were published by a publisher called Packt, and they're still available on Amazon. I never recommend people go and buy them now because they're pretty much well out of date, but they are still available for you. And if you do happen to find our book, you will see our book is selling for, the red book is selling for £9.99. My other books are selling for about £56. I don't quite know how that algorithm works, but they're really, really, really expensive on Amazon now as well. I know that they sell many.
What a great sales job you've just done there. Yeah, I'm Mark. Follow that. All I really want to say on this, because this isn't really about us and what we're doing at all, is that I've just been doing change for quite some considerable time now. I don't know whatever it is, 35 odd years. A lot of it is either CRM or data type stuff, and I've held a whole variety of roles at different levels, all the way up to exec roles and indeed non-exec roles in various different sectors. What I do want to say about this, though, is that looking at the slide you got there on the screen is what the thing that Geth and I actually met about 10 years ago, not quite, but near enough about 10 years ago, when we were trying to help a client put in a CRM and data initiative. And I remember I was leading that program at the time, and Geth came along for a for an interview, and I basically said, look, we only want somebody to come in and help us for a couple of weeks. How many years were you there after that, Geth? I can't remember now, but quite a while.
Yeah, it was about 5 years. I was.
I wasn't there 5 years, but
so the long and crux of it is there was a performance problem.
Yeah.
And the performance problem, whilst the solution was technical, was proving very difficult to implement because of the varying different parties and people involved at the time. And that's where Mark and I kind of got together. And I'm going, that's where we realized we had, let's use a LinkedIn term, synergies. That I'm not quite sure what that word means either, but we had synergies that could be useful together.
And I do think that I think there is something in that actually, but there's something that is really quite at the core of what we're trying to do, which is all about. It's all about us, the people, the humans, and we genuinely, are trying to help humans in technology, and that's our sort of fit type brand, I suppose. I guess is one way of saying it, Geth. So I just wanted to sort of make you aware that we'll come back to this at the end a little bit. We generally do try to offer, advice and tips and techniques. We host a podcast, which next series hopefully will be coming out soon, and we do some newsletters, etc., etc. But fundamentally, it's all about helping the people with data and customer-driven stuff, whether that's advice, coaching, or whatever it might be. Now, you might be wondering who that graphic is on the, where is it? On the bottom right-hand side of my screen. And that is Berry Wand. Berry is a figment of Gethin's imagination. I think that's a correct way of saying it. He's nodding.
Very much so, mate. Very much so.
We've got to say that for legal reasons, I think, isn't it? Isn't that the phrase? But she is the star of our story in the book, and we do like to tell a story to get things across. Now, we're not going to tell much of a story in this particular webinar, but lesson 1 on the lessons learned for writing a book is one to ask you, if and when, this is not you, Geth, this is you, our wonderful audience, if and when you write your book, how will you bring it to life? So, at a high level, these are the things that we're going to cover. So cast your eyes down the list there. It's everything from how to start to what you might need to look out for, and how you stuff to do with publishing, and maybe what you do with things afterwards. We've had some questions already prior to the webinar. And as I said earlier, if you guys think about things as you're going along, pop them in the chat, and Gething will bring them to my attention at the relevant point. But fundamentally, those, what colour is that in the middle? I don't know. Is it amber? Let's try to be amber, because I'm a bit of a red, amber, green person, given being as I'm an ex-program director. Writing a book, which is all about the green brackets. Publishing a book, the orange ones, and promoting it, which are the red ones. So fundamentally, I'm trying to split. I think I've actually got 3 slides which cover each of those things. So it's that writing the book itself, then it's the publishing bit, and then what we do with it after is really what I'm going to try and get through. So, how to start? Where to start? Now, I did say that we're going to reference our book throughout, and we're doing that for 2 reasons, really. One is because it's easier.
Sell more copies of it.
Well, did I say that? Yeah, but not a 50 or something odd quid. It's not going to be that price, because we're the publisher, right? We can control that, apparently. But when we started thinking about writing the book, and I'll come on to this in a minute. It doesn't really matter whether you're thinking about doing something new, a new change initiative, like building a data-driven culture, for example, or whether you're thinking about writing a book. Fundamentally, the key thing to get one's head around is why. Start with why. because that really determines everything else that comes to the right after that. So why are you doing it, and what are you trying to achieve with it? Is it are you just doing it just for you, or are you trying to help some others? Are you craving some attention? What about, are you doing it because you want some people to say some nice things about you? And what happens if they don't say some nice things about you when you get to your reviews? And do you want to make some money? Does it matter whether you make any money or whether it's successful, whatever you determine successful as? How do you know you can do it? How long will it take? How do you keep yourself on the straight and narrow? And so winding back to the sort of the writing the book process, fundamentally, all of these sorts of questions are to help start, but they also link to what the challenges are that you might have in that. Because if you don't know why you're starting and where you're starting from and where you're trying to get to, how can you possibly know what the challenges are that you're going to have going along the way with that? Now, Gethin, as he said, had done a couple of more. I think this is the right way of saying it, Geth. So dive in if I don't quite get this correct. You'd done a couple of, I'm going to call them technical books, previous to this, and he'd mentioned the somewhat extortionate price that they're selling at, right now. But
they are 5 stars. They are 5 stars though, and at £59.10, I don't know
value,
how you can go wrong. Yeah,
exactly.
on a book on.
Apart from the fact that they're out of date, but apart from that.
yeah.
But you wanted to do a bit more of a businessy oriented one, I think was partly where you were coming from, and where I'd been coming from for some considerable time. Is essentially just, I'm of an age, you can see what my face looks like, or I've been around a bit now. I just really wanted to bottle the knowledge that I have, or think I have, and try and pass it on. Now, Geth and I are working together, so yes, we are trying to grow Geth's business. That is what we're doing. And one of the questions that we asked ourselves from the off would our book do that? Would we make lots of money from from selling our book? And the answer was no, because we knew that we weren't going to make any money in the first place, and that's actually not why we set out to do it. But we did think that it might lead to other things. So as I go through this talk, what I want you to do is just bear that in mind. So for us, when we were writing our book, we kind of knew where we wanted to start. We knew that we'd quite like to sell a few copies for sure, but it was never going to make us millionaires. Geth, you want to say something?
Yeah, if that's okay. So just picking up on that point, I think when I wrote my first book, I asked a lot of people around the sort of process, and you can look at the sort of, we like to do data. We look at data. There's a long tail on book sales. So unless you're J.K. Rowling or someone who's selling 100,000 copies, you're probably not going to make the effort that goes into writing the book. It's probably not going to give you a return on the time spent. So, for example, if you're a day rate contractor, and I know there's a couple in here that are, right, the time it takes to write a book might be sort of, well, it can be any time, and we'll talk more about that later on, but it won't equate to a day rate contracting for much more than about a week's worth of work, just to put that into perspective, right? And I found that out on the first go. However, it's not the direct revenue that has been proven useful. It's the tool that the book is in making wider sales. That's how it's worked for me, and that's why I did a third one. I did say after the second one I'd never do another one, but I did change my mind. I mellowed a little bit over the years.
You're like Sir Steve Redgrave, are you, in the
the
Olympics?
Yeah. If you ever see me write another book, shoot me. And
fair enough. So
now I am 10 years later with an Amazon bestseller.
We've babbled on this slide for long enough.
Yeah,
but so what I wanted to recap on this slide, it's really important to ask yourself the questions of why you're doing it in the first place and what you're trying to achieve, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, how can you know what you're aiming for, and how can you know what the challenges are along the way? But really, really, really key point, when you've asked those questions of yourself and hopefully written them down somewhere, don't forget your answers. Because fundamentally, those answers are the things that help you to check back that you're still doing the right things, if you see what I mean. Now, if you've heard Geth talk before, particularly over the last year or so, you probably will have heard him talk about a guy called Art Williams. Now, Art Williams, I won't give you this full history, but essentially he did a lot for the life assurance industry in the States in the 80s, I think it was. And to cut a long story short, this is slightly tongue-in-cheek, but knowing where to start, he had a very famous speech, which we'll which we'll try and put the link to a section of once we get to the very, very end. We won't try and play it in here, but if you're interested in hearing Art speak, then you can. That's a crap American accent, wasn't it? But anyway, in terms of where to start, the speech that he gave is widely known as his "Just Do It" speech. So there is another sort of tongue-in-cheek, slightly message here, but all the talking in the world is great, but frankly, if you don't get on and do something, well, you're never actually going to start writing your book. Is essentially the message to convey.
And there's a certain irony around that, which we will come to,
isn't there? Just right. So the next bit, if you like, then is about writing the book itself. So on the I'm just looking at my lower screen here. On the left-hand side of my screen here, essentially, we did have a bit of an approach and a method and a plan, and we wanted to arrive. This particular bit of it is all about arriving at what hopefully looks a bit like a manuscript in the bottom left-hand corner there, rather than a book itself. Now, earlier this year, I was on holiday. And with a friend of mine was on holiday with us at the time, and as you do, over a beer sort of thing, you talk about what you've been up to, etc., etc. And I said, "Oh, well, we've been writing a book and so on. It's taken a long time, and it's full on and blah blah blah." And he said, "Oh, I've been writing a book," and I said, "Oh yeah." And we chatting about his book. And I said, well, what is it then? Is it I didn't know this before. Is it a bit of a never-ending story? And he said, well, funnily enough, I've been writing it for 10 years. And I nearly fell off my chair, to be perfectly honest. And that was the first big reveal. I said, what? Have you been writing it for 10 years? It sounds like it is bloody never-ending. And I thought, we'll tell you in a minute how long it took us, but I thought writing it for the time that we took to write the book was long enough. And then I said to him, well, what's it about? Thinking that it was probably going to be some kind of he's a sort of program manager type person, and I was thinking it was going to be some sort of business oriented book. And he came out with the very last thing I was expecting him to come out with, and he said, well, it's about religion. And I went, what? You've taken 10 years to write a book about religion? And he said, yeah. Anyway, as it turns out, he's hopefully going to be publishing it a little bit later this year. But he has to publish it under a pen name because he doesn't want to become the next Salman Rushdie, given the topic that he's writing about. And if anybody doesn't know who Salman Rushdie is, then I suggest you Google him. But he got in a little bit of trouble with his book loosely about. Lots about religion, to be perfectly honest. But the reason why I'm telling you this, all of this, is that was fine for him. So he did actually do it, and he just wanted to pick it up and put it down and continue writing it and so on and so forth. But in our case, that's not what we wanted to do. Although our journey, I think, started, Geth, about 3 or 4 years ago, and I think every now and again we get together and we go, well, what should we be doing with the business this year, and where are we going to take it, and what plans have we got, etc. And Geth has said, I really want to write another book. And I said, yeah, I want to bottle my knowledge as well, and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, so we saw, well, what can we write about? And the next year would come, and we were still going to write this book. Yeah, we still want to do that, but other things would come along. About a year ago, I think it was, we basically said, actually, let's write a book. Data's the thing, so we'll write a book about data. And funny enough, timing is everything. And we got together and we started writing that book. So I reckon it was about 12 months ago that essentially the idea, if you like, of writing a book about something to do with a data culture, came on board. And then it seemed like 5 minutes later, but I think it was probably a few weeks later, Geth had produced a straw man, basically, of that book around about Christmas last year. I think that was the case. And alluding to something that Geth said a moment ago, we I won't mention who this is, but there's somebody that we follow on LinkedIn who helps with LinkedIn marketing strategies and so on, and sales. And he'd produced this. One of the discussions we kept having for about 3 or 4 weeks was, so is it an ebook? Is it Is it a booklet? Is it a guide? Is it what is it? And I remember going around the houses, particularly with me, to be perfectly honest, not quite cottoning onto what it was we were trying to get to. So something in there for getting your agreement, your ducks in a line. But essentially, this guy had produced from content that he'd already had for donkeys, and some of it, lots of it, he gave away for nothing. He'd effectively produced, I think it was about 30 pages of A4. And it was a PDF, basically, wasn't it, Geth, of what he produced? And he sold it for a tenner. And we thought, oh, we could do that. And so in our minds, I think we thought we were probably going to write about 50 or 60 pages worth of A4 on a, not a PDF necessarily, but think of a PDF of 50 or 60 pages worth of A4. And that's sort of where we started and sort of where we agreed. But we also agreed that we wanted to... because we had other things in mind, we wanted to sort of take our own medicine really with this. So the sorts of things that we did in terms of our approach was that we did come up with a straw man, and those that the straw man is not what those sort of scrawled. They're actually whiteboard on a rolls in the middle of the screen, top and bottom of the middle of the screen. They're actually on my wall behind me. If I could be bothered to turn my camera to the left, and it was not blurred out. But those were sort of my aid memoirs, basically. And Geth had produced the Straw Man, fairly quickly. But then we did actually try to use some of our methods and our frameworks, which you can see two of on the screen there, which I'm not going to talk through in any great detail. But basically, the core framework is, well, did we have an idea? Did we have a vision of what we wanted to do? Well, yes, we did. It was this sort of 50 or 60 pages worth of A4 ebook that we eventually settled on as our, in other words, Geth was right all along and I was wrong, was essentially the answer to that. He is nodding there. And the purpose was, to help others to bottle it. So we agreed on that. We did test some things out, and actually, Geth, fairly early on, you did some stuff on Amazon, I think, didn't you, about what titles were out there in that in that vein?
Yeah, bit of keyword research, right? Yeah.
And so we had an idea of what was there and what wasn't there in this topic area. And to cut long story short, there wasn't a lot in this topic area. That there was plenty about I don't know, Power BI or data analytics, or maybe about data quality or whatever, but not a lot about a data-driven culture. So that was quite interesting. I think that there was, so we learned something, from that. Did we at that point think about the help that we needed? Now, obviously, Geth has written a couple of books before, and I've written plenty of, let's call them papers for this discussion. Nothing of the length that we're talking about here. But we both felt
mine was the length of what we talked about.
No, yeah, sorry, mine wasn't. Is what I meant by that.
No, right, sorry. Okay.
Mine might have been 20 or 30 pages of A4 sort of thing. So we're thinking about the help that we needed, and this is kind of a a lessons learned. We didn't think we needed that much help in writing the book, because we kind of knew what we wanted to talk about. We were going to follow an approach and a plan. I do change for a living. I know about that sort of stuff. But what we did think that we needed some help with was things like maybe with publishing and formatting and proofreading and those sorts of things going forward. So one of the lessons to pass on basically is based on what your vision is and what your why is and what you think your challenges are, to work out where you might need the help. Now, some might need the help in different places to others. But what I'd certainly conclude is that whatever your way of doing it is, whether it's the never-ending story from my mate who's written a book about religion and it's taken him 10 years, or whether it's what we've done or your own, having a way of doing it and a plan of doing it was actually quite important. And we did come up with some deadlines. If I remember it correctly, Geth, we sort of once you produced you produced about 50 or 60 pages worth of a straw man, to be perfectly honest. So when I say a straw man, I don't mean what you see on the screen here in the middle. That's just me scrawling things about. I genuinely mean but there was a bunch of slides and a shed load of words associated with each of those slides. It probably was about 50 odd pages worth of A4. Looking back, it was a really good structure. And I sort of had a look at it in think it was sort of back end of January, February sort of time, and went through it and went, well, I think I need to add this here and that there and this in various places. And Geth commented along the lines of, okay, tell me about what that is. And then eventually we agreed that those are the sorts of things that needed to be added. I think we said, if I remember it rightly, that our initial deadline was sometime in early May. And I can't quite remember now why we said that.
So I'll tell you why now. I'll give you some context on that. So this came about, as Mark rightly said, we had this idea. We wanted to do a book. We've had it for years, and we've just been procrastinating on it, not getting anything done, in truth. We didn't have an idea for a title. We didn't have an idea about anything, but I do data and Mark does change, and we wanted something that converged in the middle. One of the things I experienced this year and early last year, I've had lots of organizations approach me where they're trying to do more with data, but technology is not the problem. It's getting people to adapt to it. So I'm like, here's where this overlap is, because I can do the technology, Mark can do the change, and where this converges in the middle, right? We need to get that sort of balance in place, and the people and processes and stuff. Now, I wanted to write a talk, and I went to I was at PATH Summit last year, and there was a discussion around actually implementing these changes in business and it being successful. And I thought, there's actually a space here, and this is what people in the UK market that I get to see are having problems with. It's actually, the technology is actually straightforward and easy. And if I'm going too much here, Mark, just tell me. Technology is straightforward and easy. It's getting it to implement across the key stakeholders is where it differs. So I initially wrote a conference talk with a structure, and then I kind of shared that with Mark and said we could easily turn this into a book, and that's kind of where that said, we'll do that. And then he said, yeah, we'll do that, and he planned it out, and about 3 years time we'd have had this book done. So I went away and wrote some pages based on what we wanted to do, so we had something, and I probably did that in about 3 or 4 weeks. That was about February time. And then we had an initial deadline of May for publishing it, because we live in the agile world and we want to get things out the door. What is it Steve Jobs said? People who create, deliver. No, there's a saying that he's got around people who succeed ship. It's something like that, right? It's all about getting stuff out the door. And there's a quote there somewhere. And the last person I saw use that was Brent Ozar in a blog post I wrote for T-SQL Tuesday around best career advice you've ever had, and it was Steve Jobs' quote that he used, that people ship, or successful people ship. Anyway, so I said, right, I submitted this talk to a few conferences, and it got selected in a few places, including SQL Saturday in New York, which I went to in May. So in February, I'm like, right, Mark, let's get this done. Let's have the book ready to sell when I go to SQL Saturday in New York, so I got somewhere to signpost people. Anyway, that's where we got to, and I think that's about where we are in the story. So that's why the deadline was May. Back to Mark.
So, so somewhere in that, probably in that sort of late February, March, sort of early April type period, I'm looking at this book thinking, there's a lot that needs to go in this book. This deadline doesn't feel very real to me. So there's an important message in there about, well, any change, frankly, that if your deadline doesn't feel very real, then are you doing the right things in order to get to that deadline? So I think there's probably a bit of a lesson learned in there for that, for me certainly, although I probably ought to know that given I've been doing it for 35 years. But anyway, that long story short, we didn't hit that first deadline. In fact, we were nowhere near it. And there was did things change from our vision of, and this is probably where I want to get to move on to the next slide. Did things change from our vision of producing a 50 to 60 page like think like PDF type ebook type thing to where we got to? The answer is yes. And was that scope creep? And if I ask Gethin to just nod because he knows damn well that he thinks it was scope creep, the answer probably was, through his eyes, yes. Through my eyes, it was, yeah, I feel as though we need to do it. So we can agree that it was some form of scope movement, shall we say, in that.
That's just semantics, that is.
Yeah, I know. But going back to what we wanted to do in the first place, I really felt as though where we'd got to around about that April-May time, it needed to be more. That's the bottom line. And at the end of the day, actually, I think once we'd batted things back and forth a little bit between us, I think we both thought, actually, this is probably right. And so we did set a new deadline, which was Data Scotland on the 8th of September, if that date is permanently implanted in my brain. Right. So we got on with it basically, and we had various options in there. Now, the very first note I want to, so this is all about then, this is moving into this sort of, right, so we're getting closer and closer and closer. We've got various forms of that manuscript that you saw on the previous slides coming forwards. And so we're in this kind of, right, we're into this section now where we thought in the first place that we probably would have needed some help. So it's less about the writing the book, it's more about actually getting it out there and and doing things with it. We'll call that publishing for these purposes. What I would say is the very first thing I want to say on this is that little red warning sign that Gethin is next to is not trying to say Gethin was a warning. Actually, it's in entirely the opposite. What I really wanted to say is that I think it's probably fair to say, Gethin, in this period, a lot of that sort of, if I can call it finessing for these purposes, I was doing, and yes, maybe I was taking my time doing it, but I felt as though I was doing the right things. What I really did get, and a huge advantage of writing a book together, is you can have good cop and bad cop. You can have a coach. You can have the proverbial person on the shoulder. Now, if you're doing this on your own, I think you've got to work out how do you get that motivation, how do you get that advice, how do you get that critique when you need it, and the pat on the back when you need it. And for me, certainly in that sort of June, July, and then into early August periods, there was a huge advantage of having worked with another person to do that. And what I would say to you is that when you read all these other books out there, there's always a shed of acknowledgements, isn't there? Thanking various people about how they'd contributed to the book and who was involved with it and so on and so forth. And it hadn't really occurred to me until we wrote our book how true that is. So you absolutely need to have some kind of support group, whether that's a publisher or not, whether that's friends or not, whether it's your partner or not, whether it's your pre-readers or not, to help you do this sort of stuff. Now, one of the questions that we had came to us earlier, so this one's going to come to you, Geth, was essentially about publishing versus self-publishing. And the question basically was, as I interpreted it, was when did we decide to self-publish versus finding a publisher? And I'll preface that by saying our aim, I think, was always to self-publish, but I kind of want you to take us through that and maybe what you thought some of the pros and cons were, particularly with respect to your previous experience.
Yeah, fair enough. That's cool. Happy to do that. So what Mark's alluded to there, obviously the question is to go with a publisher or not go with a publisher and self-publish. And we, for this book, self-published. And there's some stuff I learned from that as well, because I've gone through the process with a publisher before. It's not as creative a process as you might think. So I think I don't want to get in front of my questions here, but what you would do is come up with an outline for a publisher, or depends on what you're doing, right? If you've got a book already, you can go to them. But if they've approached you to write a book, the first thing they're going to want, can you write an outline of what you're going to talk about? And then they will contractually obligate you to deliver the outline and the chapters against a timeline, because they work from a publishing date, which is set, and work backwards. All right, so it's like this chapter needs to be in here so we can go through all the editing process and stuff like that. Now, I wanted to do, the reason we did self-publish because we wanted to have a bit more control over that process. But I think and this is a lesson learned for Mark and I, we probably haven't even chatted about that, but a book is more than just the product, right? And like most things, the book doesn't sell itself. It can try. People might search for it on Google. People might search for it on Amazon. People might find it, but you have to promote it and you have to distribute it. And that's, for me, is where the big benefit of the publisher comes in, because of their network and their reach. Just looking back in hindsight now, because whereas Mark was finessing the book right up until about the middle of August. And I'm like, look, Mark, I need a QR code to go on the stand for Data Scotland, and I can't do that without the book being on Amazon. So it needs to be published. It needs to go. We got to that point. So we only then had we still have time for promotion. So going back to the 4 Ps of marketing, we still have time for promotion. I think Mark's probably going to talk about price in just a second, but we have to come up with a price. We have to come up with the sort of packaging around that. So don't let that disturb you. That's not an easy thing to do quickly either, because you need to put some thought into it. So the publishers, they take care of a whole lot of that. As an author, you're creating the product, and that's what you get to focus on. When you self-publish, you've got to put all those other mixes, all the other Ps in the 4 or 5P mix from your sort of marketing plan into play. So to summarize, right, there's actually pros and cons of each. Publishers do have, and I think, excuse me a second, my phone's ringing, let me just turn that off. I think for the purposes of now having done both, I can very much appreciate what the publishers did last time for me, including the editing of the book. Mark talks about finessing, but just finding the typos, finding the stuff that doesn't read very well, doesn't necessarily make sense to me because I've written it and read it back 500 times, and it clearly makes sense to me, but somebody else picking it up, it doesn't. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that the publisher offers, and then the distribution of it works as well. I think I've answered that well enough.
We'll come back to it if it's not at the end, and that's exactly what I wanted you to say. Thank you. And we hadn't discussed that at all. I'll pick up the proofreading point that we did get others to who had essentially knew nothing about it. Were actually let's say they've been involved in the world of publishing before, so they're used to doing this sort of stuff. And all I would say is that even with a really literally word by word, line by line type set of eyes going through the proofreading, you will still have a few errors that are creeping in. So in our case, I think probably a little bit more by luck than by judgment. We ended up going with the Kindle version first, didn't we, Geth? And actually, part of what Geth was constantly saying to me was, we can always, if you like, we can fix it in the print, so to speak, because you can with Kindle. You can just do another edition, and up it goes, and happy days. Once, of course, you've got a printed book out there, then that's not quite so easy, to get the new versions of that book out to the same people who've already bought it. Is basically the problem. I just summarize a couple. I'm conscious of time. Summarize a couple of the things that when we were in this period, I went out and asked quite a few people, what they did. So some of this lessons learned stuff is coming from them as well. And Geth's already mentioned things like pricing. Bloody hell, did we have some back and forths about the pricing? And you see a lot of these books on, particularly the Kindle books, on there basically going out at 99 pence to begin with, which in fact is what we did. And I think what I've concluded is that the primary benefit to that is that it increases your probability of reaching a good status in whatever category is that you've published in. Categories are a whole different set of problems, and you find that the categories for publishing, which might be, for example, management and leadership or business consulting or computer literacy. Those are two or three of the ones that we considered. They're actually different between the Kindle and the paperback categories, so you've kind of got to get that right. But having a low price entry to begin with, if you like, is the thing that helps you get higher up the charts initially. And if becoming a number one was important to you, which it may not have been, depending on what you started out in the first place, I think we didn't start out with that in mind, but I think we then thought, actually, no, this is quite a good idea. Not so much for the book, but maybe for getting a bit of cachet for some of the other things that we were then going to try and go on and do. Other obvious things, like you suddenly realise that actually, not only do you have to design a front cover and the words that go with that, etc., that if you're doing a paperback, funnily enough, you have to have a back cover as well, and that sort of passed us by a little bit as well until we got on to doing it. So all those sorts of things, that if anybody knows anything about data like searching and keywords and categories and those sorts of things, are all massively important here, and it takes time to work out which ones should be the right ones that you should use and which ones you shouldn't. I'm going to skip over. We had a question about writing an abstract, which if we get time, I'll come back to at the end, Geth, I think at this point. So I'll skip over and just get on to the next slide. The only other thing I wanted to add on this actually is that obviously we've published through through Amazon. We've not published anywhere else at this stage, and that's something that we're probably looking to do. So I think our experience is only to date only are relevant to the world of Kindle and Amazon paperback publishing, which is fine. I've got to say that the actual process of getting your book onto Kindle, once you've worked out your price and your categories and and all that other stuff, all the boxes basically you've got to tick on the forms that they require you to fill in, actually getting it up onto Kindle and actually getting it into print really isn't that hard, Geth, is it? It's a lot quicker than what you might think it think it could be. And I'll tell you a little bit when I get to the end the size of the book that we did, but it took minutes to get the book up onto Kindle in draft. And I think it was something like 2 or 3 days before once you'd submitted the print version for it to be available to then be printed on demand. Right, let's move on. So how we knew we had to promote it, and all I can really say about this is that all the things that if you go and Google this stuff, all the things that you kind of realize pretty obvious are important. If you haven't got any reviews and you haven't got any ratings, then nobody's going to look at that book and go, well, I should buy it. Choosing your category, if getting to a number one or indeed a number two or a number three, choosing your category to publish on publishing if you want to be number one is vital. And there's some science around this which basically goes along the lines of if you choose a category that is still relevant to what you're doing, but maybe not that many people publish books in, clearly, by definition, you have to sell less in order to get higher up the rankings in that particular category. So in our case, we wanted to get to some workshops and some various other things that we were trying to get to, and that's what we were trying to do with our content. We're also trying to, and are in fact using some of it on LinkedIn and in blogs to hopefully help drive traffic into the website or drive calls into Geth and myself and so on and so forth. So I think other things that are also massive truisms, if you like, with respect to this whole promotional bit is it bloody well takes a lot of time. You really do. If you really want to, if selling loads and being successful, translating to earning money, you've got to contact everyone you know. Now, between us, we've got 14,000 people that apparently we know on LinkedIn. I'm not sure we do know all of those people, but that's what it says on LinkedIn between our various contact bases.
I get 12,500 birthday cards every year, mate.
Of course you do. I don't get 2,000 because I'm old and everybody's forgotten about me, and they probably should be pensioned off soon. But it's huge, and you're not in a month of Sundays are we ever going to direct message, frankly, 1,000 people, let alone bloody 10 or 12,000 people. So that is hard work. But what we found, I think, Geth, from when you start to, you get quite excited, don't you, when you see the first sale come in, and then you see the second sale come in, and all that kind of stuff, and then you start to look at the graphs a bit and the data. In fact, Geth rang me the other day and said, "Who have you been tapping up in Germany?" And I'm going, I don't know, I haven't been in Germany, but we've sold a book or two in Germany from what from what the data tells us, and then so the stuff works. But what we do see, Amazon produced this. I can't remember what they call it, but it's a graph basically that shows you by time the amount of your rating and your ranking, and therefore the amount of books that you're selling. And it's quite interesting that loosely, the peaks of those graphs that translate into numbers of books sold loosely correlate to when you're doing stuff to promote it yourselves, when you're repeating things, the consistency that you're doing with it, and indeed some of the variation that we're doing. So all of those things are really important. Consistency, repetition, variation are all massively important to get something done. Now, was there anything else I was going to say on this slide? I don't think there was. Right, so getting towards a point where we might want to be able to ask some questions. We actually, going through all of this, we've covered pretty much most of that. There's a couple of other questions that we had before that I'll get to in a second, that we and I might bring in the third one as well that we missed out earlier on. But basically, writing a book, if you think you can write stuff, that's all about time and focus and keeping yourselves on the straight and narrow and so on and so forth. Publishing the book, you can certainly use a publisher. I think in general, a few of the comments that I had, and I can't remember whether I shared this with Geth or not at the time, is that those people that I contacted before that had used publishers largely said they wouldn't be sure that they would do it again. But the reason why they did it in the first place, because they really wanted to get a good result from the off. And so I think there are pros and cons with that. But
there are definitely pros and cons.
The biggest thing for me is if you think that it ends by writing the book and indeed publishing it, if doing something else with it and if promoting it is important to you, then it bloody well doesn't. It's just a hell of a lot of effort after, the date in September that we launched and the date in October that we launched the paperback, and it's just ongoing. And to be perfectly honest, I expect it will be ongoing for us, as we're going forward. So start with why. Don't forget your answers to it. Get on and do it. Find a method of doing it. In our case, it was a straw man and a plan and so on that we then worked to. Understand that if your thing changes along the way, that you know how to deal with that change. In our case, it did change a little bit from what we envisaged in the first place to what we ended up with. I do think we're both really pleased with what we've ended up with, and we're delighted with what people have said about it, which is lovely. Test your things out along the way. We didn't talk about. We did test out, for example, what sort of cover would sit best, and colours of the cover and things like that. And I think deadline and focus was probably the other thing that I wanted to convey on this one. Right. Thank you all for coming. If you've got some questions, pop them in the chat. There's 2 or 3 in a minute I'll get to that we had beforehand. We do the Fit podcast that's up there. We can put that in the link to that in the link if you find time, Geth, please. And same with the newsletter that we produce. We've got another free webinar coming up in 3 or 4 weeks' time about project managing data-driven change. It's the companion that we won to the one that we did about 3 weeks ago. There's similar stuff that we're conveying there. Now, one of the questions that was asked for us to us beforehand, so I'm going to level this one at you, Geth. We know the new book is self-published, but for the other titles, how complete was the book before you thought to get a publisher involved, or did you sign a publishing deal just from an abstract?
From my perspective, I was approached by the publisher to write it's a very long story, but I got approached to write a book that I couldn't do. Then they approached me again for the SQL Server 2014 book. And from there said, if you're interested, can you write, they had this idea of doing this title for SQL Server 2014. Previously, and this is probably well documented on social media, I'd written courses for various different training companies around SQL Server virtualization and new features in 2012. So when they come along and asked if I'd be interested in that, I'm like, yeah, okay. I'd definitely be interested in writing it. Wrote the outline, which was probably, I'm going to call it a 2-layer outline. So you had the chapter titles and then a bullet points of what you'd cover in each. That got signed off by them, and then we agreed, right, this is what we're going to do, and we set up. That's when we entered the agreement. So it was off a off an outline as opposed to an abstract, as opposed to there being a written published book. And then from there, it's like, I think the first one was 7 or 8 chapters long. It was literally 1 week. Each chapter needed to be turned in to go for editing, so it was done in 2 months. So going back to what we were doing, I was trying to do that with you and to get it done for me, so we could get all the chapters in. The publisher, if we'd have gone to a publisher with it, they would have wanted something concrete, flexibility, which is really what we wanted, because you don't want to put too much pressure. You don't want to put too much pressure on yourself. If you haven't got a deadline, you won't get it done. So when you're telling me about your friend and his 10-year book, that's clearly a labor of love. He's not got a publisher involved in that yet, and he might not get one, so he might have to self-publish, depending on what the what the book is, because I'm sure when people start editing it, if you've been working on it for 10 years, you're going to be pretty sensitive when people say this doesn't make sense. I don't like that. I don't like that, which is what happens, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, we've edited each other's work, and neither of us were particularly precious about wording. But when you've labored over it for 10 years, and somebody you don't know comes along and goes, oh, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense, you're going to get offended, right?
Absolutely.
So don't write it in 10 years. It'd be, unless you something you're really passionate about and really love, and you're only doing it because you want to say you've done it, then that's fine. But ultimately,
the thing is, right, he's not religious, which I don't quite understand. But anyway, so the question that we missed out earlier was, have you got any tips for publishing an abstract? So while we're sort of loosely on this topic about writing outlines and so on and so forth, what tips might you have for publishing an abstract, Geth? Oh, you're on hold. Why have you gone on hold? I don't know why he's gone on hold. So I'm going to answer another question that we had.
Sorry, I got my phone rang and I tried to turn it off and it answered.
Right, tips for publishing an abstract in 30 seconds or 1 minute, if you wouldn't mind.
Tips for an abstract. Understand what the book's about. Make sure your abstract delivers against the title, and then, because people buy the book from the title, so they're going to read the title, and what's in the book then needs to align to that. And make sure the title is something people are interested in and are likely to search for, because otherwise, you know, if it's something abstract, you're not going to sell many. Not that you're going to make much money if you sell 1,000 copies, as we know, all right? But if you want to sell 100,000 copies, you're probably not going to be writing technical books or books in this space. Use it as a marketing tool to deliver other things. How's that? There we go. That's my
brilliant. I'll add to that. If the abstract is the same thing as the description of the book, so that's the thing that you can click on to expand, not to click on to read a sample of the book on Amazon, but there's an actual thing called a description of the book in the world. What you also find is that you just need to be a little bit careful between the actual words that you use in the description versus your keywords that you use in the keyword bit. And essentially what Amazon say, if you bother poring over all their help pages on how to do this stuff, is don't put the same things in the description that you put in your keyword searches, because then it'll bugger up the search algorithms on them. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. How would we know? But that's certainly what Amazon said.
Sorry, the quote from Steel Jobs is "Real artists ship," and it's about getting stuff out the door. Yeah,
marvelous.
I'll look that up.
The other question that we had, I don't know whether have we had any other questions that have come in during the thing.
Not that I've seen, mate. No.
But the other question that we had beforehand was basically, so what it was about word count actually, and also then various other size type things. So I'll just close by saying, what does the word count look like? And I'm going to read from this, so apologies, because I needed to make some notes on this. What does the word count look like on a 250-page book? So we've actually got I think it's 251 pages, the paperback book. The answer is 41,042 words, 1,813 paragraphs, 5,925 lines. According to Amazon, that will take you 4.5 hours to read. I don't know how they come with that. What I can tell you is that one of the things we were quite conscious about going through was the size of our document. So you can write this stuff in Word, and you can upload it as Word or PDF, I believe. I think we uploaded as Word in there. We did struggle with the formatting a little bit, and actually with the paperback, we essentially paid somebody to get some formatting right for us. Didn't cost a lot of money.
Paperback needs to be PDF, I think.
There's PDF, is it? Okay, fair enough. But we were consistently getting a document as we were writing it. There was around about 5 megabytes plus or minus, and there was something in the publishing guidelines that basically says if you start to go over that too much, then you might get into trouble with what your publishing deal from Amazon was going to be. So we ended up with the size of document that we ended up with was about 3.5 meg. As a Word document. Kindle, for some reason, says it's 5.5 meg. Don't know why that is the case. And the other comparative is, whilst we've got 250 pages on the paperback, the Kindle version is 214 pages. So I don't quite know why the Kindle version is less, because it's basically the same content. And that's a pass for me.
It's just a template thing.
Is it? Okay, well, fair enough. Yeah. So that was the other question that we had beforehand. We've got about a minute or so left. I can stay on for a bit if anybody wants to ask any questions. I don't know if we've had anything coming in.
There's nothing in the chat, mate, but I can't stay for too much longer. But thank you to everyone who's come along. And if you've got any questions, do reach out to me or Mark, and I'll pass you back to Mark to close.
I think it's exactly that. So if you want to do it, do it. Work out why you want to do it. I hope you've had some insight, from us here. And I think that's it really for me. But thank you all for coming along. Anything we can help with? ? As in on the book. I'm not monitoring the chat, Geth, so I don't know whether anybody's raising their hand.
No, there's nothing coming in. So Jeremy, Pablo, and Rod, Sue's dropped already. Thank you for coming, guys. We'll close this down, I suspect, Mark, is it?
Rightio. Thank you all.
Right. Cheers, guys. Speak to you later.
See you. Bye.
Bye.